The first scream did not come from a German woman, it came from an American guard. And in that single, cracking yell under the Mississippi sun of August 1944, every woman in the marching column felt the same terror snap through her chest. A rattlesnake had lunged from the roadside grass and sunk its fangs into the guard's boot, sending him tumbling backward as the line of female POWs froze. The soldiers shouted, rifles lifted, dust blew across the hot highway leading toward Camp McCain. And for a heartbeat, Helena Kruger believed this was the moment the rumors became true, that chaos would break, that the black soldiers escorting them would unleash whatever horror German propaganda had promised. Her throat dried, her knees buckled, and before she could whisper a prayer, her vision blurred into white spots. The march had already lasted 3 hours. The heat lay heavy on the road like a wet blanket. Helena, senior clerk of the group, kept her back straight even as dizziness tugged at her. She had been raised since childhood to fear, to judge, to expect the worst from anyone who didn't look like her. Especially Americans of color. The posters in training camps, the whispered stories told by officers who had never met a black person in their lives, these had carved fear into her like scripture. And now, here she was, stumbling through Mississippi with a dozen women behind her, dust in their hair, uniforms torn, canteens empty, each step dragging them farther from France and deeper into the unknown. When the guard screamed, she felt her legs give out completely. The ground rushed upward. She never hit it. Strong hands caught her just before her head struck the gravel. She thought it was one of the white guards, rough, impatient, irritated by her weakness. Instead, when her eyes cracked open, she found herself staring into the face of a black American soldier kneeling beside her. Her heart hammered like it was trying to escape her chest. She had never been this close to a black man in her life. Everything she had been told shouted danger. Her breath came in short bursts. She wanted to crawl away, but her vision swam. Her lips cracked. She tasted blood. "You're dehydrated," he said gently, voice low and calm. His English rose and fell with a soft Mississippi rhythm. He reached for his canteen. Helena's hand fluttered weakly against his wrist in protest. She didn't even know why. Fear? Pride? Shame? The small, hungry eyes of the women behind her watched every moment, their terror mirroring hers. "It's all right," the soldier said. "Drink." He was PFC Isaiah Brown. She didn't know his name yet. All she knew was the way he unscrewed the cap, poured water into a small tin cup from his belt, and held it steady for her. Not forcing. Not grabbing. Not treating her as an enemy. Just waiting. Sweat rolled down his temple, catching the sunlight. She could hear his breathing, controlled, steady, as if nothing about this frightened him. Helena's hands shook as she reached for the cup, her fingers brushing his. Her skin flinched on instinct more than thought. Her throat tightened. But the water touched her lips and the shock of coolness made her eyes sting with sudden relief. She drank greedily, spilling some down her chin. Brown didn't pull the cup away. He let her drink until she coughed from gulping too fast. Behind them, Corporal Leroy Henry was waving off the commotion around the snake-bitten guard. Sergeant Thomas T.J. Williams barked orders to keep the column steady. Dust settled. Chaos faded. In the middle of it all, Helena was still on her knees, held upright by the man she had been raised to fear. When Brown eased her into a sitting position, she finally looked up at him fully. His eyes were dark, tired, and strangely kind. She expected anger, disgust, superiority, something to match the monstrous image her instructors painted. Instead, he simply asked, "Can you stand?" She nodded, though her legs trembled violently. He slid his arm under hers, helping her rise with careful strength. The other women stared in disbelief. Some whispered. Some averted their eyes entirely, ashamed or confused. Helena wished she could read their faces, but all she could feel was the disorienting clash of everything she had been taught and everything she was witnessing. As she steadied herself, another sound broke the air, not fear this time, but a soft whimper. It came from Anneliese Gerber, the youngest woman in the group, barely 20. Her cheeks were hollow with hunger. She swayed unsteadily, clutching her stomach. Brown slipped something from his pocket. A small packet. Rations. Helena stared as he tore it open, breaking the biscuit inside and handing half to Anneliese without hesitation. The girl froze. Her lips parted. She stared at the food like it was forbidden fruit. Then she reached out, her fingers trembling, and took it. She ate slowly, eyes filling with a mixture of gratitude and shame. Helena felt something twisting in her chest, something raw, painful, unfamiliar. It wasn't fear this time. It was the cracking of an old wall inside her. A wall she had never questioned until this very moment. The march resumed. Brown walked beside Helena for a few minutes to make sure she was stable before falling back into formation. She kept glancing at him, unable to stop herself. Not because she feared him, but because she didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. Confusion. Relief. A quiet, uncomfortable warmth she hadn't expected. As Camp McCain's wooden guard towers appeared in the distance, the sky heavy with heat and the scent of pine, Helena realized something unsettling. The first man to show her mercy in this war was the one she had been taught to fear most. The first night inside Camp McCain did not bring the relief Helena hoped for. Instead, it opened a new kind of torment, quieter but far more unsettling. The barracks assigned to the female prisoners were long wooden structures with thin walls that let every sound bleed through. Footsteps, distant engines, shouted orders from the men's compound across the field. The air smelled of pine and dust, the scent so foreign to her that it made her feel even farther from home. She lay awake on her cot, staring at the knots in the ceiling boards, replaying the march in her mind, the heat, the fear, the scream, the moment she collapsed, and the face of the man who caught her before she hit the ground. PFC Isaiah Brown's steady eyes kept returning to her thoughts like an unanswered question. She hated that she couldn't dismiss the memory the way she once dismissed her instructor's stories. Those stories no longer aligned with what she had witnessed. By morning roll call, the prisoners were groggy and irritable. Anneliese looked even weaker than the day before, her cheeks drawn tight. Helena felt responsible somehow, though she didn't understand why. Outside, the sun had barely lifted when Sergeant Thomas T.J. Williams strode into the enclosure with a clipboard, calling the roster with clipped efficiency. His tone held authority without cruelty, but the women still flinched at every name. When he finished, he gave instructions in careful German, rudimentary but understandable, about the day's work assignments. The women were to help clean the camp laundry building under supervision. Helena nodded along, though a part of her bristled at the idea of labor. But Helen knew the alternative: confinement, punishment, hunger. The Luftwaffe had promised them honor. Reality offered wooden bunks and sweeping floors in Mississippi. As they walked in formation toward the laundry building, Helena noticed Brown near the medic tent, sorting supplies with Corporal Leroy Henry. The sight of Brown made her steps falter. She didn't know whether to look away or acknowledge him. Instead, she kept her eyes straight ahead, though her pulse thumped harder. She felt ridiculous. Why should she feel anything at all? He was the enemy. A guard. A man she should fear. Yet the previous day's kindness hung between them like a thread she couldn't untangle. Inside the laundry building, steam rose from boiling vats, and the air smelled sharply of lye. The American supervisor barked brief instructions while two guards, one white, one black, stood by the entrance. The white guard, a heavy-set sergeant named Colton Reeves, watched the German women with a sneer that made Helena's skin prickle. His disdain was immediate and unfiltered. Every time a woman hesitated or asked a question, Reeves muttered something under his breath. "Lazy Krauts, should have left you all in France, think you're better than everyone else." His voice carried enough for the women to hear, but not loud enough for an officer to reprimand him. Helena felt an old, dangerous anger rising inside her, not against Reeves, but against herself. Because part of her recognized his cruelty as something she once accepted in others when it was directed at those she had been taught were lesser. Now, she stood on the other end of that contempt. And it stung. Midway through washing a load of heavy blankets, Anneliese suddenly sagged forward, her face chalk white. Helena dropped her brush and caught the girl under the arms, calling her name. The nearest guard shouted for assistance. A moment later the door swung open, and Brown rushed in with a medic's kit slung over his shoulder. His presence hit Helena like a gust of memory. She stepped back instinctively, then cursed herself and sighed for reacting uselessly when Annalise needed help. Brown knelt beside the girl, checking her pulse and lifting her eyelids with gentle fingers. "She's faint from heat and lack of food," he said, glancing up at Sergeant Williams, who had followed him inside. "She needs water and rest immediately." Reeves scoffed. "They're prisoners, not guests. A little work won't kill 'em." Brown's jaw tightened. Helena noticed the smallest shift in his posture, controlled, firm, but unmistakably offended. Williams stepped between the two men, voice low. "Follow protocol, Reeves." Reeves spat to the side but said nothing else. Brown lifted Annalise effortlessly, his arms steady and careful. The women stared as he carried her out of the laundry building. Helena's chest tightened at the sight, part fear, part confusion, part admiration she refused to admit. She followed behind the group as they escorted Annalise to the infirmary. The moment they entered the cooler, shaded tent, the relief was palpable. Brown laid the girl on a cot and began preparing a saline drink from a powder packet, mixing it with water. Helena stood by the doorway, fingers twisting together. She wanted to speak, to thank him, perhaps, or to ask about Annalise, but the words jammed in her throat. She instead watched him work, watched the precision in his movements, watched the way his brow furrowed with genuine concern. No propaganda story she'd ever heard matched this truth. Annalise's eyes fluttered open after a few minutes, and she whispered a soft, "Danky." Brown nodded with a small smile. "You'll feel better soon." Williams dismissed the other prisoners back to the laundry building, but before Helena could follow, Brown looked at her for the first time since the previous day. It wasn't a long look, just a brief meeting of eyes, but it shook her more than she expected. There was no triumph, no smugness, no demand for gratitude. Only a simple human acknowledgement, as if he understood the turmoil she refused to name. Back in the laundry, the work felt heavier. Reeves seemed angrier, glancing often toward the medic tent as if Brown's compassion offended him personally. Helena kept her head down, scrubbing until her knuckles ached. But her mind remained in the infirmary, replaying the soft murmur of Annalise's voice, the careful way Brown handled her, the way Williams shielded the prisoners from Reeves's cruelty. It was as if two Americas existed in the same uniform, one that fed her fear, and one she wasn't prepared to understand yet. By the end of the day, as the sun dipped low and the camp settled into its evening rhythms, Helena realized with a painful clarity that the war outside had ended for her the moment she crossed into Camp McCain. But the war inside, the war against the beliefs planted in her since childhood, had only just begun. The storm arrived without warning, rolling over Camp McCain in the late afternoon like a punishment from the sky. One moment the air was still, heavy with dust and heat. The next, wind tore across the compound, slamming shutters against barrack walls and lifting dirt in sharp spirals. The women had just finished their work detail when the first thunderclap exploded overhead, so loud it rattled the flimsy glass panes. The guards ordered everyone inside, shouting over the rising howl of the wind. Helena grabbed Annalise's arm and pulled her along the path toward their barracks, skirts whipping around their legs. The sky had darkened so fast it seemed night had dropped early, and every woman rushed with the same dread. These buildings were not built to withstand a serious storm. Inside, the lights flickered as the rafters groaned. Rain hammered the roof in sheets, and the wood swelled with an eerie creaking sound. A few women huddled together, whispering prayers. Helena tried to steady her breath, but every gust of wind felt like a fist slamming into the walls. She kept glancing at Annalise, who looked small and frightened, her fingers knotted around the edge of her blanket. When a violent crack split through the storm, something large snapping outside, several women shrieked. Helena's heart pounded. She had never feared weather in Germany the way she now feared an American thunderstorm inside a foreign wooden box. A sudden crash came from the far end of the barracks, followed by a burst of wet air. Part of the roof had ripped free. Rain poured through the torn section, soaking bunks and flooding the floorboards. Women scrambled to drag cots away from the water, but the wind only grew harsher, ripping another shingle loose. Fear tore through the barracks like fire. Someone shouted for help in German. Another screamed a warning. One woman slipped and fell hard against the floor, crying out in pain. The building shuddered, and Helena felt a wave of terror unlike anything she experienced during capture. The door burst open, slamming against the wall, and figures moved inside through the spray of rain, guards, silhouetted by lightning. Their uniforms were drenched, their helmets slick with water. A voice she instantly recognized called out, "Everyone stay calm. We're getting you out." It was Sergeant Thomas Williams, yelling over the storm. Behind him were several soldiers, including Brown. The sight of them stopped Helena's breath for a moment, not from fear, not anymore, but from a strange, overwhelming relief she didn't understand. Williams strode forward, pointing to groups of women. "Move in twos, stay behind us. The mess hall is reinforced, safer than here." Another piece of the roof tore free, smashing onto a row of bunks. Screams erupted. Brown reacted instantly, rushing toward the collapse. Without hesitation, he lifted one side of the fallen timber, as two prisoners crawled out from beneath it. Rain soaked his uniform, water running down his face as he shouted instructions. Another bolt of lightning lit the room, and for a second Helena saw him clearly, jaw clenched, eyes sharp with focus, every movement purposeful, fearless. Reeves, the guard from the laundry building, stumbled in behind them moments later, cursing loudly. He shouted at the women to move faster, his voice edged with fury instead of urgency. Williams shot him a glare. "Enough, Reeves. Help or step aside." Reeves muttered something under his breath but obeyed. The soldiers formed a corridor through the rain, guiding the women out into the storm. Helena clutched Annalise's hand as they ran through mud that sucked at their boots. Wind cut through their clothing like knives. Rain blinded them. The camp's floodlights flickered in the distance, fighting against the darkness. A tree limb crashed down nearby, sending mud and splinters flying. Helena stumbled, but Brown appeared beside her as if he had been watching. He caught her arm, steadying her. "This way," he shouted. His hand was warm despite the cold rain. She blinked water from her eyes and nodded, unable to speak. Halfway to the mess hall, the storm intensified. The ground shook as thunder split overhead. Annalise tripped in the mud, her legs giving out. Helena dropped beside her, trying to pull her up, but the girl was too weak. Before she could call for help, Brown was already kneeling, lifting Annalise onto his back as though she weighed nothing. The girl wrapped her arms around his shoulders, trembling. "Stay close," he called to Helena, and she followed them through the chaos, shielding her face against the rain. Something inside her chest twisted painfully. She didn't know what to call it, only that it burned hotter than fear and deeper than gratitude. Inside the mess hall, the noise of the storm became a muffled roar. Lamps glowed warmly, reflecting off metal trays and wooden tables. The sudden safety was almost disorienting. Women sobbed in relief, hugging one another. Annalise was laid on a bench, shivering but conscious. Brown covered her with a dry blanket and checked her pulse again. Williams moved through the hall with brisk professionalism, assigning guards to reinforce doors, shutting windows, making sure everyone was accounted for. Helena stood near Annalise, rain dripping from her hair, watching Brown as he worked. Her breath still came in uneven waves. She had no words for the sight she had just witnessed, these men, soaked, exhausted, risking injury to rescue women who had once been told they were enemies not worth saving. And the man she feared most had carried her friend through the storm like his own kin. Reeves barged in with a scowl. "Ridiculous. Risking our necks for them." Brown turned his head sharply, his voice quiet but fierce. "Risking our necks because it's the right thing to do." Reeves scoffed and walked away, but for the first time Helena felt something new as she watched him: pity. His hatred made him small. Brown's compassion made him unshakably strong. As the storm raged outside, Helena lowered herself onto the bench beside Annalise. Brown glanced at her briefly, their eyes meeting for the second time that day. She opened her mouth, searching for words, any words. But the only thought echoing in her mind was simple and devastating. Everything she had been taught about these men was a lie, and the truth was saving her life one storm at a time. The war ended the way storms end, first with a crack, then a silence so deep it felt unreal. In early May of 1945, word began spreading through Camp McCain like a trembling whisper: Germany had surrendered. The women heard it first from a young American private delivering supplies, then from a radio faintly playing in the guard shack. Some prisoners wept instantly. Some stared blankly at the ground. A few laughed in disbelief. Helena felt none of those things at first. Instead, she felt a dizzying weightlessness, as if the world beneath her feet had been lifted and set down somewhere unfamiliar. The certainty she had clung to for years, orders, ideology, discipline, the belief that Germany would prevail, had evaporated in a single broadcast. Everything was different now, yet the camp looked exactly the same. The announcement changed the atmosphere of Camp McCain, though not in the way Helena expected. The guards did not gloat. They did not jeer. The black soldiers, especially, carried themselves with the same quiet dignity as before, though she sensed in them a subtle easing of burdens, a breath released after years of strain. The white guards varied, some indifferent, some openly irritated by the sudden flood of questions from prisoners about repatriation. But the black soldiers, they remained steady, a calm presence in the midst of confusion. Days passed with uncertainty as the camp administrators organized transport lists. The women would soon begin their long journey back to Europe. For many, this was cause for joy. For others, fear. No one knew what waited for them in a broken Germany. Helena felt trapped between these emotions, pulled in both directions. She watched Anneliese day by day. The girl regained her strength slowly, her cheeks filling out, her eyes brightening. Brown checked on her regularly, bringing extra water, sometimes slipping her fruit or bread when no one was looking. Each time, he gave a small nod to Helena as well, as if acknowledging her quiet vigilance. One humid afternoon, Helena found herself near the medic tent, carrying a stack of blankets for washing. Brown stood outside, repairing a torn strap on a stretcher. When he noticed her, he straightened with a polite, almost shy smile. She hesitated before stepping closer, her heart tapping nervously against her ribs. There were things she had wanted to say for weeks, words that had grown heavier every day she kept them inside. "PFC Brown," she began, her voice soft and uneven. It felt strange speaking his name, it carried weight, importance. He looked up, surprised she addressed him directly. "Yes, ma'am?" She swallowed. "Thank you, for what you did during the storm. And for Anneliese. You have been..." She searched for the right English word, one she rarely used. "You have been merciful." He studied her for a moment, not with arrogance or amusement but with warmth. "Mercy shouldn't depend on who someone is," he said. "Or what someone's been taught." The words cut deeper than she expected. She opened her mouth to respond but found no voice. He seemed to understand her silence. "If you need anything else for your friend, let me know." She nodded and walked away, her chest tight with a complicated ache. She realized then what troubled her most. She had spent years believing she was superior, yet this man carried himself with a grace and steadiness she had never possessed. The shame that followed was not humiliation, it was clarity. On the morning their repatriation papers arrived, the camp buzzed with restless tension. Trucks rumbled near the gate. Officers barked orders. The German women gathered in the yard, holding small bundles of their few belongings. Some looked excited, others terrified. Helena held her diary close to her chest, the leather cover warm from her hands. She had begun writing in it weeks earlier, quietly, late at night, unable to sleep after the storm. She documented everything: the march, the fear, the collapse, Brown's calm voice, Anneliese's rescue, the way the American guards contradicted every hateful lesson she had been taught. She titled it, "These Men We Feared Saved Us." The words had come to her in a moment of unexpected truth. The final inspection began before loading into the trucks. Williams approached the group first, his manner respectful but firm, checking names and confirming transport orders. When Brown appeared behind him, Helena felt her pulse pick up. She stepped forward before she could lose her nerve. "PFC Brown," she said, louder this time, careful not to tremble. He turned, meeting her eyes directly. "Yes, ma'am?" She extended the diary toward him. He didn't take it at first, puzzled. "What's this?" "My record," she said. "My truth." She forced herself to continue. "You saved my life. You saved Annalise. You changed everything I thought I understood. This," she tapped the book, "is what I want you to have." He slowly reached out and accepted it, his hands gentle, almost reverent. He looked down at the cover, reading the title. When his eyes lifted again, they were softer than she had ever seen them. "You don't owe me this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "It's not debt. It's honor. And freedom." Brown swallowed hard, emotions flickering behind his steady expression. "Thank you, Miss Kruger." Helena felt heat rush to her eyes, but she refused to cry, not here, not now. Instead, she offered a small, trembling smile. For the first time since arriving in America, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a human being reclaiming her own mind. As the women were loaded onto the trucks, the engine rumbling and dust lifting into the air, Helena watched Brown tuck the diary carefully into his uniform. The sight filled her with a strange, profound peace. When the truck jolted forward, she looked back through the wooden slats. Brown and Williams stood side by side, watching the convoy leave. The storm in her heart, the fear, the lies, the prejudice, finally began to settle. She realized then that the war inside her had ended not with Germany's surrender, but with a simple act of kindness from the man she once feared more than the war itself.